While it's sunrise for Mitch in San Diego, it's sunrise on a new football season for the rest of us. We preview Big Ten Media Days coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down and as we start getting ramped up for the fall seasons. FanDuel is the place for you to go. And they're hooking up all customers with a booster, a bonus daily. That is right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. That's at FanDuel, FanDuel.com. Head there to get started.
All right. Good morning. Welcome in. I am Mitch Sherman. Connor Happer is with me. We are moving along here in July after another uneventful weekend in the world, right, Connor? Nothing going on around us. That is until Big Ten Media Days gets underway in Indianapolis. We've been doing this podcast for 3.5 months, and finally, and I'm saying spring football does not count now that we're here in July. Finally, we have real football on the horizon. Big Ten Media Days is the strongest signal yet that the offseason is getting close to being over. So in a few weeks, we'll look back at this as just a distraction from the longer break of 7 months. But right now, this is the best we've got. It's talking season, podium after podium after podium, full of interviews. There's Radio Row, media interviewing other media incessantly. We've got dumb questions, dumb opening statements. There's cold cuts and cold coffee in the workroom. As they say, Connor, let's go, let's question. What's
a classic Media Days moment. Oh,
what's got you revved up about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in Indianapolis?
Wow, you did a great job there of not only just saying what's going to happen, but also bringing some real color to it. I mean that really. And now I'm kind of jealous of the people who are going to experience the cold cuts and the cold coffee over the next couple of days, yourself included. There's a lot. I mean, obviously, I think the focus and attention will be on the new teams in the league, and we'll talk about kind of the depth of it here in just a little bit. But from Nebraska's side of things, Nebraska's kind of laying in the weeds a little bit. They're not going to be a team that will be flocked to by the national media, even on the day where they have their sessions, which is split with a few other teams in the conference. So they're kind of laying in the weeds, and I was reading, the Athletics preview kind of rundown with various writers from the Big Ten.
Missing from that, by the way.
You were missing. Wonder why? Look at your background.
Yeah, I got one more day of vacation here. Sorry, Nebraska fans. There was not much of a preview of Nebraska in the Athletics Big Ten Media Days roundtable. I was going to do it. I had my invitation to do it and chime in from vacation, and then the deadline just kind of came and went, and I totally forgot about it. So I'm left out in the cold.
But even though you weren't there, Nebraska still got some representation. There were a couple of the writers who said, hey, Nebraska could be a team that surprises some people. So I feel like that's kind of their lane right now, their alley. And I don't know, that doesn't bring you much extra attention. Obviously, there's going to be some mildly national questions, I guess, about the quarterback situation. And there's an awareness that Matt Rhule always does a lot better in year 2 than he does in year 1. So Nebraska's a team that's kind of laying in the weeds a little bit, and that's not a bad spot for them going into year 2 under Matt Rhule here.
Yeah, so we're going to preview some Big Ten items here in this episode, and you should check out that roundtable with Scott Docterman and all of the other Big Ten beat writers who gave a preview of the event that starts tomorrow on Tuesday and runs through Thursday. 3 days this year with the 18-team league. For Nebraska, the whole crew will be there on Wednesday. You've got second-year coach Matt Rhule, first-year AD Troy Dannon, and then Ty Robinson, the defensive lineman, Ben Scott, Nebraska's center, who we talked about last week in our countdown that will continue today in the second or third segment, and then Isaac Gifford, the safety from Nebraska, leader of the secondary, is going to be there. The Huskers undoubtedly are going to be an under the radar team. There was not a lot of mention of Nebraska in the big roundtable that my coworkers did. A brief mention here of, oh, hey, can Dylan Raiola get things going in his first year, or will they have to wait another season? They're under the radar story as a team. So, they're not going to be under the radar for us. They're not going to be under the radar for Nebraska fans. This has still been an offseason full of great anticipation. What are you expecting will be the discussion points around Nebraska?
Well, I think there is this awareness, this national awareness that Matt Rhule comes in and he builds programs. And I like there's a confidence in that too. He did it at Temple and he did it at Baylor. And so Nebraska was, I don't know, right on track as far as most people would have expected just nationally last year as far as how it goes. Now it didn't bottom out as it did at his other two stops. So I think people will be wondering, okay, year one looked like that. What's year two going to look like considering your previous two stops? That'll kind of be the main thing with them. And then I think we'll be trying to find, and like I said, we'll discuss this a little more when we get into our bigger picture conference preview here in a minute, but there will be, people trying to find who sits in that second kind of tier. It will be, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, maybe Michigan, in that first group. And then who's threatening for 8, 9, 10 wins and a college football playoff appearance? And can Nebraska, say that they are in that group? Teams like USC, Michigan maybe is one or two in the first or second group. Can Washington do it coming off of a national championship appearance last year? And nobody really expects them to. And so Wisconsin and Iowa, the teams that are always kind of contending for the West. So I think Nebraska will be kind of included a little bit in that conversation, and that'll be probably a bigger picture talking point surrounding them.
Yeah, I think people are going to take a look at the Nebraska players who were there, and there are a few quarterbacks who are coming. You have Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, the Oklahoma transfer, who's probably the most notable of the quarterbacks who's coming. He's a Heisman candidate stepping in. Can he put up the numbers that Bo Nix did a year ago in Eugene? USC has its replacement for Caleb Williams, who's coming in as one of the representatives for the Trojans. But like Penn State's not bringing Drew Aller, which was a point of contention among the writers. My coworkers, they all wanted to see Drew Aller there. Those especially those schools around Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio. He's a name that those people have known for a long time. But James Franklin, he will only bring seniors to Big Ten Media Day, which is laughable, but whatever. That's what it is. I think they're going to look at the Nebraska delegation and go, okay, you got these two big guys over here. What's going on there? Because Nebraska's never been a team in the Big Ten era that has lived up to its reputation historically as a dominant program at the line of scrimmage. And that's what Big Ten football has always been about. Is it starting to open up now with Oregon and USC and others coming in? I don't know that they're going to change the nature of the Big Ten, even though it is 4 teams and not 1 or 2 coming in at one time. Nebraska has some legit linemen, and it's not just Robinson and Ben Scott. They easily could have brought Nash Hutmacher and Bryce Benhart in those guys' place, or so. There are Big Ten caliber offensive and defensive linemen in Lincoln who are ready to win games for Matt Rhule's team in the trenches. And maybe that isn't the sexiest story. Maybe it's not the one that the talking heads are going to get into when Nebraska inevitably comes up for like the just like the 1 or 2 minutes that the Huskers get in the spotlight, or the guys on BTN. They'll spend 15 minutes on Nebraska with all of the Huskers who are there. I don't know that they're even going to be talking about Nebraska's progress on the offensive and defensive lines, probably somewhat, but I think it's what people should take note of if they're looking for a legit, true storyline about these Nebraska players and this delegation that's headed to Indianapolis.
Well, and I think it's the thing that, it's popped up a couple times this summer, the anonymous coaches quotes and stuff like that. I think that's the thing that makes the other coaches around the league nervous. If Nebraska can be depended on to have a big physical offensive and defensive line, and that they're going to be tough to move, and it's just going to be tougher to beat them. And then if they have a situation where they don't turn the ball over, then it's going to be even tougher.
Yeah, because let's be real, like the place that Nebraska has made, has made a mark, has made a dent in the Big Ten in the past is when it had a Trey Palmer who stepped up, or Luke McCaffrey was this flash in the pan, or Maurice Washington. The Huskers would come at you occasionally with these incredible athletes who could do amazing things on the field. But Big Ten programs knew that the consistency wasn't there, that they had to withstand maybe a touchdown or two, or a highlight reel play from somebody like that. And they would ultimately get their way because Nebraska didn't have the horses in the middle to push other teams around. And when it came down to it in the fourth quarter, at least in recent years, at least since Mike Riley and then Scott Frost took over and in the first year of Matt Rhule, there weren't going to be players to win games at the line of scrimmage. And now Nebraska still has some of that high-end talent like a Jalen Lloyd or a Tommy Hill or others who play the skill positions on the outside, but and some younger players who are coming up. Malachi Coleman, of course, is in that category. But it also has these two big linemen who are going to be there talking about things on Wednesday.
Yeah. So coming back here, we'll take a wider scope look at the conference with its new 4 teams, where Nebraska might slot themselves in the media poll. So we'll take a look at the conference as a whole when we return. But first, please remember to subscribe, follow on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. You can also email us, lockedonneb@gmail.com. Check us out on YouTube, subscribe. We're looking to build that thing before we start our very first football season together. We'll come back and we'll preview that season in the Big Ten coming up. All right, Tapper here for the FanDuel Sportsbook. And as people know, if you listen to the radio show, if you listen to this podcast, I do love sports. I love them so much that I never want the sports to stop, but sometimes they stop. Sometimes or at least they slow way, way, way down. We're past the MLB All-Star game. We're past the playoffs in both the NBA and the NHL. Just got fewer things going on, but that's okay. FanDuel's got me covered, and it's got you covered as well, and they keep the sports going whenever you want. All we have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. So there's still Major League Baseball. Our Royals, Mitch, are coming off a sweep of the White Sox. It's the White Sox, but I still feel good about it. So you can throw in a bet on the Royals or Bobby Witt Jr., who is magma hot right now, to get like 5 hits. Whatever you'd like to do, head to the FanDuel Sportsbook. They're hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get yourself started there. That is with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, big picture league-wide here. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. This will be Mitch's last appearance with this beautiful, beautiful background, unfortunately. And in his sun-kissed skin. Look at that, Mitch. Nice.
I'm going to be going into back into the Midwest, just a bit sunburned, mostly some extra tan going on, but the sun is intense out here in San Diego. I'll say that it's not 100 degrees, but you got to be careful. Just a few minutes out there, if you don't have the sunscreen on, is going to get you.
I walked out my back porch this morning, and I was hit with a wave of humidity that I was not prepared for. So you'll be enjoying.
Oh, is that back?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It wasn't here the last couple of days, but I felt I just could feel the water on me as I walked out this morning. So that was nice. And you'll be enjoying that when you get to Indianapolis coming up tomorrow. But Let's take a look at the at league wide here as Media Days begins tomorrow. Nebraska will be on the Wednesday crew with UCLA, Iowa, Michigan State, USC, and Penn State. So that's an interesting group there. Nebraska and Iowa kind of always getting paired together. Tomorrow you get the commissioner and you get it's really just Ohio State Day tomorrow. That's
former Big Ten West and Ohio State Day.
Former Big Ten West, Rutgers, and Ohio State. So you look and we've seen some previews come out. We'll get the media poll tomorrow. A few new coaches. Mitch, what are you looking forward to around the league as far as storylines or how it might even play out this year?
Yeah, well, there'll be a lot of talk about the playoff because that's the world that we live in college football. And in the preview that we've talked about in this episode that posted this morning on The Athletic, there was a question asked of my coworkers about the college football playoff and how many Big Ten teams would get in. And not surprisingly, it was a near consensus that Ohio State and Oregon would make the playoff. And then there were a smattering of other teams. I mean, I think it's generally agreed upon that 3 or 4 Big Ten teams are going to make the 12-team playoff. So you saw representation from Michigan, from Penn State, and then a vote for Iowa, which I thought was interesting. Is Iowa potentially a playoff team? I mean, it's certainly more of a legit conversation than is Nebraska a playoff team, and that was the subject of our Friday podcast. And I appreciate all the comments in the YouTube comment section telling us how crazy we were and go win a road game before you even have this conversation. Look, it's July. It was simulated on EA Sports College Football 25 by a smart person, Max Olson. So we're going to talk about it, whether you like it or not. But Iowa is a different conversation because the Hawkeyes, again, are going to have one of the best defenses in the country. And Iowa tends to go 9-3, 10-2. And I don't think that's necessarily different against the schedule that Kirk Ferentz's team plays in year one of this reconfigured Big Ten. So could we be looking at Iowa as a playoff team the first weekend in December?
Well, I tell you what, Iowa is always going to get, I don't know, I shouldn't say break in the schedule, but I mean, Iowa was the team that retained their most rivalries from the old Big Ten West and from the, just historically the Big Ten. So they're going to play Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska every single year. And they get that. I don't know if it's a built-in advantage, but they get a little taste of they're the most Big Ten West team we still have. That means something.
I know that I know that the schedule works out so that everybody plays everybody a certain amount of times over a 4-year period. But it does seem like Iowa, and we can just kind of pretend like this is the reality, even though mathematically I don't think it adds up. But because Iowa has the permanent rivals, 3 of them, it seems like they don't tend to catch like a stray Oregon as often as other teams. But the reality is that they do. It all works out mathematically. Who Iowa doesn't play as often, there really isn't anybody. They just play the teams that they're tied to historically more often. So
they do go to Columbus. They do go to the Shoe this year, but that's kind of it. The rest of it is manageable for them. So, I mean, if they can improve quarterback play, just like mildly improve offense, I mean, that could be a 10-win team. That could be an 11-win team.
And that could be a playoff team.
Absolutely. If you win that amount of games, you're going to put yourself in the conversation. So I think that's probably a little bit more of a reasonable conversation than getting Nebraska in. But that being said, I mean, it's interesting the way, we talked about this on Friday, if you get those 10-2 teams, what'll be this sort of splitting points between the two? It's kind of who looks better and who's done more against which team. So Iowa won't necessarily look flashy in that category if they're submitting a bid for the playoffs.
Right. The Big Ten Media Days is really a coaches event. We care about the players that are there, but the coaches, they dominate the show. They're the ones that go on the big podium on that's on TV before they break things out into the side podiums, and the players, they all have to share that spotlight with each other. And many teams don't bring their best players. So there are 5 new coaches in the league this year. You've got Curt Cignetti at Indiana, who I'm interested to hear talk on Thursday, because his rhetoric so far as the Indiana coach has been, take no prisoners. Like, we'll see you back here in December. This is where the conference championship game is played, right? All right, I'm scouting out my locker room right now. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that he said since he took over. So I'm curious to see if that continues now that the season is only a month away. You got Jed Fish at Washington, Deshaun Foster at UCLA, who's whose predecessor, by the way, is Chip Kelly, is the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. That will be a talking point when the Buckeyes take the stage on Tuesday. Jonathan Smith, the former Oregon State coach, is in East Lansing at Michigan State. And then Sharon Moore, who coached half the season because Jim Harbaugh was suspended at Michigan last year. He's now fully in charge of the Wolverines. So I'm intrigued by Signetti among that group. I think a little bit with Fish. He's been he's got some Big Ten ties, and he had some success in Arizona before coming to Seattle. I'm curious how that's going to work. And then maybe next, most curious about Sharon Moore and what that looks like, how he follows Harbaugh in that seat.
You're definitely right. It's a coach's event, and the new guys always seem to get some attention. So and I remember, I believe it was PJ Fleck's first media days back at the old McCormick place several years ago, and he did an interview with anyone who would ask. He sat down with every local radio station and spread the good word about rowing the boat. And so I would imagine it'll be the same with those guys a little bit, maybe with the exception of obviously Sharon Moore as well. But there's some interesting people in that group, and there's definitely some interesting people in the group that already exists as well, and where those job statuses lie and things like that. So I'm excited to get things going tomorrow. It'll be fun to kind of follow all the coverage, and we're looking forward to yours as well.
You know who else's first Big Ten media days it is, and this kind of caught me by surprise when I thought about this last week. Our first conference media days of any significance is Troy Dannon. So a year ago, he was the AD at Tulane. And we think of Dannon and we go, he came from Washington. They played for the national championship. He's been through the big moments in college sports. No, that was really it. He has been an athletic director for a long time, but what he saw in the preseason lead up at Northern Iowa and Tulane, it pales in comparison to what he will experience. He never got a preseason at Washington. So what he will experience this week in Indy, it was new for Trev Alberts a couple of years ago when he drove himself to Indianapolis so he could just enjoy I still don't remember what the reason was why Trev didn't take the team plane. He wanted to stay longer because there were some meetings with his new colleagues around the league. So no reason to fly back on the team plane, and when he wanted to be there a day later. I don't know that I see that. I think Troy will probably come with the Nebraska delegation and go home with the Nebraska delegation. But is he going to be somebody who's walking around and granting every interview that's asked of him on Radio Row, or will he kind of hide back in the hallways and let Rhule and the players take the spotlight? We'll see. We'll find out about that on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity for him to do that. So I would imagine that he will a little bit. All right, we will take our final time out here. We'll come back. We'll continue our list. We'll keep you updated a little bit on recruiting when we return. But first, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on our TV all day? And you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, which is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today delivers can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back. Final segment on a Monday in July. Nebraska did get a commitment over the weekend. Defensive lineman Cade Peterzak of West Fargo, North Dakota, the top-rated player in the state of North Dakota. So Nebraska's now got linemen who are the top-rated players in the state of North Dakota and South Dakota as part of this 2025 recruiting class. That's kind of a trend from last year, where Nebraska, I believe, had more top-rated players from various states than any program in the country. So take that, Alabama and Georgia. Like, you may have the number one class, you may have 7 5-stars, but Nebraska's got 8 players who were the top-rated in their states. It was like Montana and Hawaii. So top-rated player in the state of Nebraska, depending on the recruiting rankings that you most closely follow, is still at large, and that's Christian Jones, the Omaha West Side linebacker. So we'll continue to watch him. But going into August now, Nebraska's recruiting class is getting up in that number that we really expected it to be at the end of the summer. 17, when you're looking at perhaps a smaller class that Matt Rhule will sign in his going into his third year, is right on target. And then recruiting interestingly ramps back up this coming weekend, kind of a quirk on the calendar, right as the preseason around the country begins and coaches get back into town after their vacations. Nebraska's got its big barbecue event that it will host on campus on Saturday, I believe. It's definitely this weekend, and there could be some big time prospects both in the 2025 and 2026 classes who are headed into Lincoln for that event. So we'll get more into that as the week goes along. But to finish our show, back to our countdown of most important Huskers. We are at number 6 today to review. We've had Javen Wright, the linebacker, Tristan Alvano, Nebraska's kicker, center Ben Scott, tight end Thomas Fedoni, and we stay in that ball catching phase of the game here with number 6. Connor, drum roll and unveil our next honoree.
We're going to go with Jamal Banks at number 6. The transfer from Wake Forest over the last couple of years, so 2 years combined at Wake Forest, he's got 101 passes for almost 1,300 yards. He's not Nebraska's fastest wide receiver. He's the most experienced by far, though. And every single report that we've heard so far on Jamal Banks has been like way over the moon positive about how he's fit into the team and how he's kind of grabbed that culture and led and stuff like that. So Banks is a good pick here.
That's kind of the thing with him is I think that there are others. Isaiah Nayor, the Wyoming and Texas transfer, he's gonna light up the field with his speed. I think he'll be the one that maybe gets the attention of defenses the most, along with Jalen Lloyd. And when I was kicking this thing around, I thought about putting Jalen Lloyd in this spot. Like one spot's going to go to a Nebraska receiver. Who should it be? And Jalen Lloyd, has the numbers at Nebraska from his true freshman season to back up that candidacy. But Banks, I think, is going to be the steady hand that Dylan Raiola as a freshman will need in this offense to lean on. He actually was considered by the Nebraska brass as someone that it could take to Indianapolis, which says a lot when he's yet to play a game as a Cornhusker. So he came in the winter and was heavily involved in what the coaches described as Nebraska players taking things to another level with the mat drills, with the off-season training program. The standard was raised because a few players raised it on their own. And that's what they're looking for, obviously, in the offseason, is for the players to lead this stuff. And Jamal Banks, in spite of his newcomer status, he's a fifth-year senior, and he led the way. He helped lead the way, along with some of these guys that you'll see in Indy this week and some others on the roster. Banks is so important just because of the reliability factor, the experience factor, and of course, Nebraska to diversify its offensive attack and be the kind of offense that Matt Rhule knows it needs to be. It's going to rely heavily on the wide receivers, and I think he's the guy at the front of the line.
Nebraska's had some halfway decent success now, grabbing basically their number one wide receivers out of the transfer portal as 1 year or 2 year guy. Really 1 year guys. I mean, you think about Samari Toure and you think about Trey Palmer. The 1 year they got Conavai Noah, and that wasn't necessarily a huge hit for them.
Good player.
And they went for Billy Kemp last year, and that was, I don't know if that
who can forget the career of Billy Kemp at Nebraska.
I don't know if that was as much on him as it was just Nebraska's offense kind of in general. So
and asking him to be a 1 is a lot. It
at like 5'9".
Yeah, speaks to your situation. But Jamal Banks is 6'4", man.
Yeah, it changes the situation a little bit. So I think there is precedent for him to have success, and then you add on the fact that he's going to be. I mean, he enters into a much better situation than any of those other guys had, as far as his quarterback, offensive line, the rest of his receiving core, like any of it. It should be pretty good for Jamal Banks. So, I mean, I think ideally he's even higher, potentially on this list as it kind of goes along as guys that they need to sort of rely on throughout the season. They do have some depth there, so that's good. And they're trying to obviously create more, but Banks is pretty clearly, I think, the leader of that room, and he's only been here just a few months.
I'll tell you, the guy, and Banks didn't do a lot in the spring game. The guy that the depth and the more Nebraska can spread out catches among the wide receiver group, the better things are going to be for Jamal Banks, because I don't believe that he's necessarily someone where if a defense puts all of its attention on him as a receiver, that he's still going to get his yards. Like Trey Palmer, it didn't necessarily matter. Like Trey Palmer could just run, like you could put one guy on him, two guys on him, three guys on him. He had the speed to still just go ahead and run right past everyone on a defense. Banks is going to get tough yards. And if a team is focused on shutting him down, I think that's attainable. But if Lloyd is split out, if Nayor is split out, if you've got like Alex Bullock, and Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, and you're doing some things with a young Carter Nelson and Thomas Fidone, who we talked about at number 7 on this list, it just makes life so much easier for Jamal Banks. I think that's some of what he's looking for in coming to a place like Nebraska, which is a leap for him because Nebraska hasn't been that program in the last couple of years, in recent years at all, where one receiver benefited from the depth and play of other receivers. But I think, they did a good, Garrett McGuire, Marcus Satterfield, Matt Rhule did a good job of selling Jamal Banks when he was in the portal on what his role could be and on how much he could be helped by the others in the receiving core. And I would say that in his first 7 months on campus, despite it being the off season, he has seen ample evidence that this is going to be a group of receivers, just a group of pass catchers, because you've got running backs who can catch the ball, who will allow Jamal Banks maybe not to put up 1,000 yards this year, but to be a very effective number 1 wide receiver in the Big Ten.
Quickly, before we get out of here, the Big Ten media poll from Cleveland.com has dropped. Ohio State is the favorite in the Big Ten with 21 first place votes. Oregon gets 6. Nebraska finishes 8th, or starts, I guess, 8th in the media poll, behind Wisconsin, USC, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. So pretty much right there in the middle of the pack. We'll have some more of that to react to as we go on throughout the week. But we'll be fully in talking season the next time we give you an episode here. Want to remind you before we go that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports streaming 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app.